When we read the church fathers, especially when they're writing about spiritual things, they'll make these extreme statements. So like the first one, love is a holy state of the soul, disposing it to value the knowledge of God above all created things. We cannot attain lasting possession of such love while we are still attached to anything worldly. And we think, well, gosh, I'm attached to lots of worldly things. So does that mean I don't really love God at all? Well, no, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that we experience, especially this idea of knowledge of God, it's talking about an experience. Later on, he's going to call it the light of the knowledge of God. It's this encounter, this experience of God, but we can't hang on to it when we're attached to things of this world. So again, it's not something that maybe lots of people have experienced the light of God in some small way for a brief instant, right? But they lose it. It goes because their attention is focused on their inner attention on worldly things. We'll talk about that quite a bit more next time. And so in verses 2 and 3, he describes a process by way of which we can become less attached to worldly things and have our love for God increased and more steady. So notice verse 1 ends with this word, while we are still attached to worldly things, and then verse 2 starts with the word dispassion. And so he's going to, Maximus, a lot of his sayings seems kind of like you're reading the Proverbs where one verse seems completely unrelated to the next. Think more deeply. Pay closer attention. He's got a train of thought going on here. And if you pay attention, you can really make a lot more sense out of what he's saying. I mean, you can read one verse at a time and it's often very powerful. But when you can follow his train, it's even more powerful. So dispassion is the contrast to attachment to worldly things. What does dispassion mean? Instead of giving you a technical definition, I'm going to give you a practical definition that really helps me. Dispassion is a kind of holy not caring that deeply cares. It's a kind of holy not caring that deeply cares. Right? So when one is experiencing dispassion, they have a very deep care about the things, the people, the created reality around them, but that care does not overwhelm them emotionally so that they're attached to it, right? They're aware of it and they're experiencing a certain amount of pain or joy depending on what the thing is, but that pain or joy doesn't overwhelm them and control them, right? So a dispassionate person is not a person who doesn't feel anything. That's not what dispassion means. Dispassion means a person who, or dispassion is a experience or a way of being that cares deeply, deeply about the created reality, but isn't attached to it or controlled and manipulated by it. Which is our biggest problem, right? That's the attachment that keeps us from keeping our attention on the love of God and our experience in the light of the knowledge of God. So chapter 2, or verse 2, he gives a sort of backwards step ladder. So we're going to look at 3 first because it'll be easier to follow. Then we'll go back to 2 and it'll make more sense. Okay? So here's the ladder. And many church fathers like to present the spiritual life in a series of steps or ladders, or in some sort of construction terms or journey terms, as though there's movement, right? Our spiritual life is not a static experience. It involves movement. And as Father Maximus said beautifully once, there are 39 steps in the ladder of divine ascent, according to St. John Climacus. And you may never, ever, ever get much past the first step. But once you have your foot on the first step, you've already left this world. You see, so it's not that you have to reach the top of the ladder to be saved, because salvation is a process, right? It's also a destination, but it's also a process, right? The Christian way is a way, right? That's what they used to call the Christian movement in the first couple of centuries. The way. Are you on the way? Are you on the way, right? It's not, have you arrived, right? Are you already saved? Well, that wouldn't make any sense in the first couple hundred years of the church. Well, it wouldn't have made any sense until a couple hundred years ago, a few hundred years ago, right? Salvation was understood as a way. So this is the way he describes. Look at 3. If you have faith in the Lord, you will fear punishment. Now, punishment here does not mean retribution. In fact, later on, he'll explain a little more clearly that it's referring to the natural consequences of perverted reality, right? As my spiritual father says, you throw rocks in the air, and your mother says, don't throw rocks in the air or you'll get hurt. But you keep throwing rocks in the air, right? You keep throwing rocks in the air, and mom says, don't throw rocks in the air, you're going to get hurt. And then finally you throw a rock in there and it falls down and hits you in the head. And you run to mom and say, Mom, why are you hurting my head? You're punishing me for disobeying you. Well, in a sense, yes, it is a punishment for your actions, but it's also just a natural consequence. This is how the world is constructed. This is the kind of world we live in. There are consequences for what we do, right? And so fear of God isn't this fear that God is going to be capricious, and, oh, he might be mad at me today. He was pretty nice to me yesterday, but I don't know about tomorrow. God might be pissed off because I didn't do all my prayers today. No. This is not. God doesn't change. In a couple verses, Maximus is going to explain how that is. So when he says you fear punishment, he's not talking about this fear that God is going to somehow be capricious and say, oh, you didn't jump through all the hoops today, so, I'm going to give your car a flat tire or give you an extra 30 days in purgatory, or whatever your system is in your head, that the way God punishes. He doesn't do that. But the fear of the Lord, or the fear of punishment, is this awareness that what I do matters. What I think matters. What I say matters. It has consequences. And so if I have faith in the Lord, I will fear punishment, and that fear of punishment will lead to control, self-control. It will lead you to begin to control your passions, right? You know what? I really want to eat another cream puff, but if I keep eating cream puffs, I'm going to put on 30 pounds, right? It's not, it's a fear of punishment in a sense. It's a fear of a consequence. But the passion is alive in me. This passion is driving me, right? I may experience this passion of hatred or anger. Oh, Alex, I'm so angry at you. But I know that if I let a word come out of my mouth, I'm going to regret it. How do I know that? Because every time I speak when I'm angry, I regret it. So, I walk away, I control myself. Faith leads to fear of punishment, which Maximus calls the fear of God. It's the same thing. Those are synonyms, not synonyms, not cinnabons. I'm thinking about passions, things I lust after. So the fear of God leads to a kind of external constraint. I begin to control myself. I may still be experiencing those passions, right? I'm still angry at this and lusting after that and experiencing envy and experiencing these passions. But out of fear of God, because I believe in God, I begin to control myself, right? Once you control the passions or begin this experience of controlling passions, it's not a once and for all thing. We spend our life doing this, right? You will accept affliction patiently, and through such acceptance, you will acquire hope in God. So what happens when I have a really strong desire for something and I control it? I experience suffering. I experience sometimes really almost physical pain, right? If you're experiencing anger, right, and you are saying, no, it's not right for me to speak, right? I will not say anything edifying, but I experience this pain. And what does that? It teaches me to be patient, right? To suffer long, right? And he links three things here, which we'll get to in a minute. Accepting affliction, patience, and forbearance. And they're not synonyms, but they're different ways of talking about the way we learn to endure pain, right? So one way, accept affliction. That's when sickness, it could be some kind of pain that's happening in my life, and I just say, okay, God, it's here, right? Patience has more to do with not running away. It's the Greek word hupomeno. It means to remain under something, right? So I'm in a difficult situation, but I believe that it's right for me to stay here, and so I remain. I could run down to the grocery store and buy a gallon of ice cream, but I feel like, okay, it's really God's will for me to sit here with my lettuce salad, and this is the right thing to do. I'm experiencing pain out inside, and I could alleviate that pain by running out and getting a gallon of ice cream. But I'm going to eat my salad and be thankful, right? And then forbearance refers to our relationships with others, right? I could, I'm using Alex as my example. I could punch Alex in the nose. It would feel so good, right? But I'm going to forbear, right? I'm going to hold back, right? Or some other sort of immoral activity, right? I could participate in a certain immoral action with somebody, and I know it would feel really good, but I'm going to forbear. I'm going to not go there. I want to go there, right? And so these three sorts of suffering that we learn to experience, we find out that, in a sense, it doesn't kill us. And that our relationship with God begins, or our understanding of God begins to shift from just faith that, yes, I believe that God is there, to this kind of genuine hope that He's going to rescue me somehow. I don't know what it's going to look like, and it may not be till after I'm dead, but this hope begins to be born in us. And from that hope, we begin to keep our focus. Instead of, okay, in the past, when I felt this passion for ice cream, I would go to the store, get some ice cream, gobble it up. It would give me a temporary sense of relief, and there it is, right? But now, because of my faith in God, I've acquired a kind of fear of God, and because of that fear, I begin to put external constraints on self-control. I don't get the ice cream, but what's the result? You think I'm obeying God, everything's going to be wonderful? No, you obey God and you suffer. Right, God, I'm doing your will. Why does it hurt so much? And you're patient, and you forbear, and you accept affliction. And what begins to happen is that faith turns into something inside you and becomes what I think St. Paul calls a sure hope, right? But just hope. It's this expectation. It's more than just God's there, I believe in one God, the Father. I believe these things. It's now I have this expectation, this hope that God is going to deliver me in some way. And what that does is it begins to shift my focus away from not just the ice cream, but even the suffering itself. The very suffering, the very passion that used to motivate me, I'm looking at it less and less, because it's like, it's like a friend of mine who has a chronic problem, and how you doing? Are you in pain today? He says, I'm always in pain. But what am I going to do? Stay home? Right? He just keeps going, even though he's always in pain. But what begins to happen is our focus shifts away from the pain, and we begin to experience dispassion. That is, we start to not care that it hurts so much. And then our focus shifts and we begin to pay attention more to this hope inside us. And that hope creates detachment or dispassion, which is then how we acquire love for God. So that's how he explains it in verse 3 from the ground up. Now let's go back to 2 and then I'll stop. I know I'm talking a long time. So 2, he does it from the top down. So dispassion engenders love. Hope in God engenders dispassion. Patience and forbearance engender hope in God. These in turn are the product of complete self-control, which itself springs from the fear of God. Fear of God is the result of faith in God. So he presents this ladder. And as with all ladder or metaphors or journey metaphors that the fathers give us, it's not an absolute thing. You don't go from rung 1 to rung 2 and never go back to rung 1 again. The image I like to use is the ascending helix, right? So I'm encountering this struggle here, and I pass through perhaps many or even all of the stages, but then I kind of return to the same problem again. But I'm at a different place. And so the way I encounter that same passion, that same problem, that same situation is a little bit different. And I pass through all the levels again, and I encounter it again, but I'm at a different place, right? So this ascending helix is, I think, a helpful metaphor, like a spring, a spring, right? All right, so that's enough for tonight, probably. That's probably too much for tonight. The next several verses, 4 through 12, he talks about what it means to value the knowledge of God. So that's what we're going to talk about next time, is what does it mean to value the knowledge of God? And then after that, he has a really long section on what it means to, he says, to love God, you have to love your fellow human being. So he has this really long section on what that looks like, loving your fellow human being. So we'll talk about what it is to value the knowledge of God. Then we'll talk about, after that, what it means to love your fellow human being, what that looks like. All right? God bless you, and thank you.